Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, a hotter sex life, or a powerful legacy. Find out how good your life can be on this episode of Man Alive. Also, as I've supported men in their love and work lives for 15 years now, many men ask for the right words to say to be more successful, attractive, and desirable. But I found it's not so simple as giving scripts or lines because every man is different. So giving words or scripts would be like giving a tall, thin man a shorter, wider man's pants, or vice versa. The words have to make sense for you and your personality, and there's so much happening beneath the surface that people are responding to. If you're interested in how to become a better lover and leader in your own unique way, go to ShaynaJamesCoaching.com/quiz, or you can text ALIVE to 44144. It only takes a couple minutes and you'll start to get an idea of how you can be both more respected and desired. After you fill it out, we can schedule a time to review your quiz and talk about your specific challenges and desires. So again, go to either ShaynaJamesCoaching.com/quiz or text ALIVE to 44144. That's ALIVE to 44144. Enjoy this episode of Man Alive. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Man Alive. I'm excited to be here today to talk about something that feels important, especially in this day and age, which is how to be successful in the world and also be a great person, right? How to be effective and not have to give up being a kind, caring, inspirational person in the world. And I'm really excited today to have Ben Zoldan on today. Ben, welcome.
Well, thank you. And first, let me just say thanks for inviting me into your tribe and your community.
Oh, you're so welcome. So welcome. So for those of you who have not met Ben, Ben is the co-founder of Story Leaders, and he's been at this for about 10 years after working in sales and has created programs to help corporate cultures that are maladaptive actually bring humanity and connection back into the culture of business. So he's worked in companies like Hewlett-Packard and Salesforce and, companies that are on the leading edge of reviving corporate culture to include humanity, and also wrote a book, What Great Salespeople Do. And as Ben, as you and I were talking about the book, you were saying in some ways it's so much bigger than sales, right? It's really about understanding what great people do and how to truly reach and impact people. And so I just want to say I'm grateful for you. Having attended one of your workshops, I'm grateful for the depth of humanity and connection that you brought to a business context that was a first for me. And it just gave me a lot of hope for our businesses and our business culture.
Well, thank you for that. That was a beautiful intro. And you're welcome. You said I've been at it for about 10 years. I feel like I've been at it for a lot longer, but I was practicing something different. I think I was becoming an expert in all these other, you said the word maladaptive, all these other things. I think I spent so much time living just like this almost dual life. And so I've been at it for a long time, but I feel sometimes like I'm an expert at the things that I'm preaching against, and I'm learning a ton about the things I'm preaching for. Does that make sense?
Well, not yet, but I'm excited to hear more about it. Because, I imagine what part of what you were at sales, you were working in sales for a lot longer than 10 years, right? 10 years is actually since you started Story Leaders. So when you say you had a dual life, can you say a little bit more about what that was like?
Yeah. What got triggered when you introduced me was you said that, the aim here behind my work is that we could integrate doing good and being successful. These things aren't at odds, but those things were always disconnected in my life. Here, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
So I was in sales early on in high tech, and I got promoted into management. I always wanted to be a manager because I thought that was like, climbing up the ladder and stack rankings. Everything was like a ranking.
Yeah.
So I got promoted into management. I'll never forget it. My first lesson in management, on the day that I was promoted, my boss brought me into my new office, right? So I was so stoked. I had my new office. like he brings me behind my desk and there's a chair, which would be my chair behind the desk.
Mm-hmm.
And he leans over and he goes, okay, the first lesson. And he raises this chair up. And then he goes, walks around the desk and he lowers the two chairs that are facing the desk.
Huh.
And he goes, first lesson is you always have to be higher than people.
Interesting.
And like at the time I was like, yeah. And I wore that as a badge of honor.
Yeah.
So I feel like that to me is like a metaphor for how I related in especially like in the corporate world. But if I look back, it was no different growing up too. And in the culture I come from, this very like type A personality, carnivore,
dog eat dog.
Yeah. And you win at all costs and you bulldoze through. And it's almost like, the aim is to be bigger, better, higher, taller. Right.
Yeah.
But then it shoves other people aside.
Yeah.
And then I grew up in that culture. Like that to me is the bravado of the culture that I signed up for, and I wore it as a badge of honor, and it would shove people aside. And what I would do is compensate, because I was like, if I'm doing that, I have to go donate or go do philanthropy, because that would give me my mojo.
You actually would compensate, or you would do the things to support other people.
Right. So I came from this world, and I don't know if anybody can relate to this, where these things were at odds.
Yes.
Doing good and doing more, or success and being good, were at odds.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until some aha moments later in life that I realized that actually one can be the fuel, that we could be good and have just unbelievable ability to put our handprints on the world.
Yes.
And it's like these things aren't at odds with each other.
Yeah. Well, and it to me, it feels, in some ways revolutionary to hear this, even though I think it's becoming more common these days, but a lot of men I've worked with, right, there has been I have to either give up something to have the success I want. And it sounds like you're starting to integrate more and more, and to be a whole person everywhere you are, including, doing your work and doing sales trainings and all of that.
Yeah. And what do you mean by that?
By being a whole person in those places. Is that, what are you asking?
Yeah, it's interesting when you ask that question, brought that up, that I don't know if we were ever allowed to like fully show up as our whole person.
Yeah.
Like I always felt like I'd put on the suit.
Yeah.
At 7 a.m. and come back and take off the suit like it was a superhero costume, but It wasn't real. So I always felt like showing up as our full selves. I mean, I had like a soul crushing experience. So I have 2 daughters, 20 and 18. Mm-hmm. Both of them are artists. So they admire a ton of artists. And one of my daughters shared with me this article she read. She was following one of her favorite artists. And this person was blogging about how she went to art school in New York. Immediately after art school, she went and got a job on Madison Avenue, right? Full on corporate America.
Yeah.
And she said on her first day, she's probably 22 years old. So I remember what it was like.
Yeah.
Being that age and getting into the world. And she said on her first day, her boss brings her in and says, if you ever have to cry, go in the bathroom.
Ugh.
So she shares this in this article, and it's like just really short blog post, and it's lit up with comments. And then I was like crushed thinking about when my daughters go into the world, mm-hmm. Is that what they're going to do? Like, am I going to pass this torch to my beautiful daughters, and they're going to go into that world where they don't get to show up? Yeah. And I know it shows up maybe differently for men than it does for women, but not really. The feelings are the same.
Yeah.
I had different, it's the same thing as that chair.
Yes. Right. Oh, sorry. I had to go back to the chair, right? The chair, right. It's the same thing.
Like we're not fully given the permission, like granted the permission to show up as who you are.
Yes. Well, and that was what I found so exciting about the training that I did with you was, the way you opened it and you told this deep, this profound story about a woman who was in service in the world during a shooting, and you were moved to tears, right? You brought the vulnerability that set the stage for everyone else. And most of the people in the room, were either salespeople or, like myself as a coach, I do some element of sales. And to me, it just gave this permission, this deep permission for all of us to be human and vulnerable together, and to be better at what we do so we can serve more people. So, I see that you are leading in that way of creating a world where your daughter wouldn't have to be in an organization like that.
Yeah. And I really hear you say, like permission, when someone gives you that space, it's as if they're saying you're allowed to go be who you are.
Yeah.
And anybody who knows me knows the story of Antoinette Tuff. May I?
Yeah, please.
And this was in 2013. And I remember I was sitting in my living room, like, do you ever like just kind of lounge out and you open up your laptop and you just kind of go through your emails? Like I sometimes will start off like a Saturday morning with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the TV on the background, and on CNN, they were airing this 911 recording. And this 27-minute audio recording of Antoinette Tuff. And Antoinette Tuff was a part-time bookkeeper at a public elementary school in Atlanta. And this was like, I think it was the Thursday or, the day or two before I'm watching this on CNN. The day starts off like any other day until Michael Hill, who was a 21-year-old who had a history of mental illness, walks onto this elementary school campus with an AK-47 and a backpack with 500 rounds in it. And shots are fired. This is a public elementary school.
Yeah.
And so we've all seen, only 8 months earlier was Sandy Hook, by the way. And Antoinette Tuff is a bookkeeper. She's in the front office and immediately calls 911. She hears the gunshots, and CNN plays this audio recording. So I shut my computer down and I'm listening to this on CNN, the audio recording, and you hear Antoinette Tuff, and it's like you can hear the terror in her voice because it's a 911 recording, so it's public, and you're listening to this thing, and it starts off like, 911, what's your emergency? And you hear this woman's like terror, but it's like so surreal because she's kind of trying to whisper like this.
Yeah.
She says, there's a gunman that came in, and there's an exchange between Antoinette Tuff and the 911 operator, and the operator says, ma'am, can you get to somewhere safe? And she goes, I think I can, puts the phone down, thankfully doesn't hang up so you can hear the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Comes back like 30 seconds later and says, I don't think I can get out right now. He's like coming in. And the most chilling thing happens. This gunman now is face to face with Antoinette Tuff. Mm-hmm. And you hear the exchange. He's like barking orders at her. You can hear gunshots. He's saying, everybody's going to die today. This is an elementary school.
Oh.
And then you hear Antoinette Tuff just kind of like bobbing and weaving, kind of trying to, like, she doesn't know where to go with this. She just, relaying the orders to the 911 operator. So this is going back and forth. And after about 5 or 6 minutes, something comes over Antoinette that's like so hard to describe, but like this empathy and compassion. We overuse these words, by the way, like, because it can't even begin to describe how she starts to relate to this guy in the most unexpected way. And she starts to say, hey, honey, in this Southern accent, it's so beautiful. Essentially, like, I don't know what it's like for you, but I know what it's like for me to be in my darkest days. Yeah. And those weren't her exact words, but that's how I made sense of it. And she says, my husband left me. We've been married for 33 years. And she fully opens up to this gunman. And as she does that, you're listening to this thing. I remember I was listening to this thing so blown away. Like my heart went from like beating like this.
Yeah, I could feel like my heart's, pounding and I have chills.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
But she starts opening up, and I remember my heart rate would go like this, and it
slowed down. But what was more profound was this gunman, then you hear kind of faintly him open up, and he starts to share what's going on with him. And then she's like, yeah, I have a son who has multiple disabilities. And she starts to open up about that. Wow.
And you could hear her then just kind of just listen to him, a gunman with an AK-47. And he starts to open up more, and he talks about being off his meds, and he has a parole officer, and he starts to open up, and he's scared. And this is now, everything changes in this room, by the way, everything. Yeah. And she's not trying to get this gunman to put down the gun. She's just there with him.
Yeah.
And then you hear him say, after they're, sharing with one another, he says, maybe I should just kill myself.
Oh.
And it's kind of a pause, and she says, yeah, I wanted to kill myself too when my husband left me. But I didn't. And baby, I'm here with you right now. Oh. And I love you.
Wow.
And there's some exchanges. He tells her to get on the school's intercom and says, asks her to apologize on the intercom. Now, keep in mind, you can see this documented later, that this is like SWAT, the newscast, everything's there. Like, this is fully national coverage.
Yeah.
Because it's actually happening. It's a hostage situation at this point.
Yeah.
And basically gives her permission to tell the 911 operator that they can send in the cops. He's going to lie down on the ground. But something amazing happens at the very end. He's like, okay, I'm going to lie down. I'm going to put the guns away. And then she tells the 911 operator, you come in now, and you hear this, the police come in just, poof, right?
Yeah.
And you almost hear a part of her voice that is almost saying, don't hurt him, don't hurt him.
Yeah.
Like, I think about that a lot, because I feel as if in the world, this way I described my upbringing, we didn't have our guns up to each other, but I feel like we did. I feel like I spent a lot of my life in competition, fighting, win, lose, zero sum, bulldoze, get to the, have the plaques, the awards, all of this stuff is like creating division and disconnection. And we have our guards up to each other. We walk down the streets, guards up.
Yeah.
And what Antoinette Tuff, I remember this like whoosh coming over me and going like, whoa, here's somebody without even trying and getting the person to put down their guard, did that because she saw somebody that was feeling something real.
She saw a being in front of her who was
And I later, got to know her, and we've talked about this a ton, and she talks about it now as like, I saw a boy same age as my son who was struggling and was in pain.
Yeah.
So I think we use these words like empathy and compassion, like they're soft words or woo-woo, or, it's easy to say these words if it were on this.
Throw away, like a tissue, like, right. It's like, it doesn't have very much value in a way.
Right? But it's like these things that are soft are not soft. They're hardwired. A friend of mine says these are high human skills. They're not soft things. So why are we chalking these things up to being soft? Because then they're relegated to the sideline. What if what we really focus on were these things? And when we do this really deep level of listening, compassion, and sharing our own stories, that we have an ability to put our handprints on the world.
Yeah.
Like, we need to take a page out of Antoinette's book. That's how I feel.
Oh, that story is so moving on the deepest level. And I guess what I'm curious about for the listeners, right, is how would you take a page out of the book, especially in situations around business and relating in business and sales, and, the pressure's high and people are kind of guns up, protecting each other, competing. Like, how would you make a shift like that, knowing that in a way you're risking, right? If the culture is not already set up like that, you're risking losing your job, your respect.
Yeah. Well, I shared with you, I feel like I'm more of an expert on the other side. So I feel like I can talk with a lot of confidence about how to not be like Antoinette. What just popped into my head just now was a memory I had of an old friend, a buddy I went to college with. His name's Rich. And it was during the war, when the war kind of, broke out in Iraq. So what was that, like 17, 18, 19 years ago or so?
Yeah.
And a group of buddies and I were on this like email chat. Like, there's a group email, and I'm going to guess there's like a dozen of us. And it was like guys being guys. But it wasn't just like a guys being guys, dudes thing. It was like something else showed up in a crazy way. We were like, half of us were on this side, and then half of us were on this side of the debate, right?
Yeah.
And I remember like we would just lob in like, well, this is why I'm right and you're wrong. And then no, this is why I'm right, you're wrong. And then it was like, these are the facts that you don't know, followed by no, these are the facts that you don't know. And it was like this big debate over like the so-called facts.
Yeah.
Here's a history lesson, right? If you weren't so stupid, you would know this.
Right.
And then it like devolves into full on, well, you're a warmonger. Well, you're a this. You're a tree hugger. And then it gets really bad and people start dropping off of the email chain. Like,
this is friends. You guys, all of you knew each other.
Yeah, like we are down with each other. This is like college buddies.
Yeah.
People start like dropping off this, like, take me off this list here. Unsubscribe me to this conversation.
Yeah.
But Rich and I stay on. And then it's just like the two of us and we're going to town. And we said the gnarliest things to each other. Like, I think I kept the email thread because like, I can't believe the things I said to my friend.
Mm-hmm.
And we lost contact. We just basically said, well, fuck you. Well, fuck you. And that was it. Our friendship was over and it was years.
Wow.
That went by. I think it was like 10 years that went by and we ran into each other in some circle on a business trip actually. And when I looked at him, I was like, man, I've been thinking about you a lot and I'm sorry. And we owned it and like we repaired it and it was cool. But I think about how I created division. I had a belief about something, a point of view in the world. And so did he. And we're on opposing sides of this thing.
Yeah.
And I know there's a different way to reach people. So like what I want to share with is like, I just coming at the world with this like a singular point of view. And you just, it'd be like Antoinette Tuff saying, there's no way out. You're going to, you can't do this. Put down your weapons. The cops are going to come. It's like we shove things down people's throats. Like, no, you're wrong. This is why. And we create a division. And what comes up for me is this. And is when you talked about risk. Mm-hmm. I think that's the risky side that we're going to alienate people. Like that's a risk I don't want to take.
Yeah.
Here's an idea, a way to look at risk. May I?
Yeah, please.
So I met a guy through my work actually who was a former special operations, special ops, United States Army, 10 years, multiple tours in in these war-torn cities. And he spent the last tour in Iraq, embedded in Iraq, special forces looking for, these covert operations, right? And he's sharing this with me. I'm like so out of my league. I don't come from that at all. Yeah. Like, I'm like a conscientious objector. Like that ain't my zone. But I'm listening to this guy who's like, so even though he's like that level of the military, he dispelled every myth I had. He wasn't like this bravado, this guy. He was like this he had this fragility to him in this, like, he was this like handsome guy. He was this articulate, super educated guy, but he was doing some pretty like crazy stuff, his line of work. He's like, Ben, let me talk to you about risk. Because we all think like it's a risk to go do whatever, to be vulnerable, to be yourself, to take off the mask. He's like, let me tell you a story. And he goes, my line of work was kind of like sales. We had to go build relationships with people in these war-torn cities and go like literally sit in people's living rooms and go develop these kind of connections with people so they would reveal, intelligence to us. Go tell us where the bad guys, quote unquote, bad guys are, right? And he goes, what we would have to do is sit in people's living rooms, but the first thing we'd have to do before we walked into their living room is leave our weapons at the door. Like I had thought about that, but then he gave me some context. Okay, so ready for this one? Yeah. He says, I want you to imagine, because I'm special forces, that the enemy, as he called it, knew who we were. And there was like bounties on our heads. There was a $50,000 bounty with my picture posted like on telephone poles. Right? That means these people could kill me at any point and get $50,000.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing in Fallujah, $50,000 goes a long way.
A lot longer. Right? It goes a lot farther than here.
Right? And he goes, and here's the other thing. If any of these native people in these villages get caught supporting U.S. forces, guess what happens to them?
Right. They would be killed.
Well, it's actually worse. Their whole families would be.
Oh, geez.
So now he's going into someone's living room. Imagine this if you think you have a tough job.
Yeah.
You're going to someone's living room in a war-torn city. You're trying to develop a connection and get them to open up to you, essentially, right?
Yeah.
And if they were to murder you, they would be set for the rest of their lives financially. And yet, if they support you, they're putting their whole family's lives at risk.
Mm-hmm.
Like the odds are kind of against you. And yet he says, I'm going to walk into someone's living room and their house and leave my weapons at the door. And he said to me, Ben, that's lesson number one. That's the first step to building trust. Leave your weapon at the door. The next thing he said, though, absolutely blew my mind. He said, Ben, after that, we'd have to take off all our body armor.
Wow.
I know, right? Now I'm thinking like the images in my head of like Zero Dark 30, right?
Yeah.
And all these movies. And he says, that's the first thing for building trust. And we'd have to go sit in these people's living rooms and essentially develop a relationship. And in his line of work, he said they would use the phrase, it was kind of like a joke, a euphemism, that when they would go back at the end of the day to their battalion, they would ask each other, did you remove the fig leaf? And he kind of joked, right, about it. And I was like, okay. But it was basically, let me show you mine, and that would give you permission to show me yours.
Wow.
Like, and I think about that a lot. I think about like why I feel risky sometimes if I go into a situation and I show up in a way that's vulnerable or so-called risky. Like, I feel like we have this view that things are risky. What's risky? I show emotion. I may cry. Well, why is that risky? It's risky because I grew up in this environment that you said at the top of this call was like maladaptive. Who says that it's risky or we're not supposed to cry or we're not supposed to feel vulnerabilities or even more share them?
Well, right. Well, I mean, the whole culture does. And yet it sounds like what you're also finding is that as you open up, and this guy, you know, in this special forces situation, as he took the armor off, other people followed suit, or there was a connection and a loyalty, and trust was a big word you just said that happened, that couldn't happen if that didn't come first.
Right. I mean, when you think about trust, it's as if we think we have it backwards, that we think we have to have trust in order to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And maybe in our culture, we have it backwards, that we can be vulnerable in order to develop trust. Like, I think about this, my daughters are coming out of those horrible years, you know, the teenage years.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And so I think about trust, like how much they would trust me. Like, I would think about the doors being open to their bedrooms. And my gauge, if I was being like a good human being, this is how stupid I would make sense of it. Like, I'm trusting my sales craft if how much their door is open. Like, that was my way of making sense of it. If their doors were closed, they weren't really trusting me. They weren't letting me in.
Yeah.
And I remember when my oldest daughter was struggling, she was in high school, and she's going through the same stuff. Like, in her private high school in LA, in the senior quad, listen to this one. They had a big like whiteboard, and it had rows and columns. And on the left side, on all the rows were all the seniors' names, and they had columns. And as the seniors were getting accepted to colleges,
oh God,
yeah, right, you know it's coming. They would write down like what universities these kids got into, like, and it was creating such a level of competition and insecurity and shame and worth. And am I good enough? And you have a kid going to Harvard or Stanford or Yale, and then I'm only going whatever. And it was just like, it's the same thing as the chair. It is like, to me, it is, and I haven't been able to make a full connection or be able to articulate it fully, but it's inextricably linked. Like, it happens before the corporate world. It's happening it's like we're weaponizing and mechanizing the school systems, right? And it shows up different for men and women. I know as a man, it shows that I have to be what a so-called man is supposed to be like.
Yeah.
But here's how insidious it is. For me, it showed up as a father. Like, I want to know, is that door open to their bedrooms? Because if it is, it's just a symbol. Because then, are their hearts open up to their father?
And then the symbol for you is like, am I a good dad?
Right, which is the heart, and it all starts and ends with that in my life. And so I had a hard time as a parent. I remember one night going to my daughter's room. She's struggling with that whole, what college am I go to? Who am I as a person, as a woman, as a student, probably, you know, she has all these hot interests in life, figuring it all out, right?
Yeah.
And one night she's like crying herself to sleep. It was so hard as a parent. And how's my daughter doing? And one night I go into her room. I see my daughter kind of curled up with her blanket. She would like cover it up, like covering her chin, all, just so you can barely see her face. She's having a really hard night. Yeah. She's like literally crying herself to sleep. And I'm like frantic and I'm feeling it. And I looked at her in this moment. And in this one moment, for some reason, what came out of my mouth was, I was like, Zoe, there's something I want to share with you. Like, I remember in every way feeling what she was feeling with the blankets covering her head.
Yeah.
And in this instant, something came over to me and I said, Zoe, there's a reason I felt like that. Like when I was a kid, she kind of looks at me with her nonverbals were basically, okay, what, Dad? And I said, well, gosh, I'm scared to tell you. And she looks at me and she goes, well, what? Why are you scared? And I said, because I'm scared what you must think of me. And then she's like, well, what is it? And I go, when I was younger, I had that same feeling of wanting to cover my head with the blanket and, because I went through abuse.
Yeah.
And I talked about abuse I had went through. And for me, it was sexual abuse. And it was abuse it was something I would always hide from. I could never talk about. Like, there's no way. I didn't learn to talk about this until I was probably in my 30s. Like, and I was a lot younger and I went through that. And I'm like, I swear to you, I'm like trembling in that moment.
Yeah.
And I share this with her. And I was like, so she's probably 17 at the time. And like, I hadn't even shared it with her because I was scared.
Wow. You'd never told her before.
No. And it's not like I'm trying to hide anything from my kids, but it was just so like fucking scary.
Yeah.
I had shared it with her. It was like, and she looks at me and she goes, God, I'll never forget this. She goes, now we're both like crying.
Yeah.
And she goes, Dad, I'm so sorry that happened to you. I'm like, thanks, sweetie. I'm like, thank you. I sat down at like the foot of her bed and she goes, you know something, Dad? I'm like, what? And she goes, we all go through life and we like have a facade on.
Yeah.
I'm like, what do you mean? And she starts to open up and she starts to tell me all these things that I didn't know about. She was this like star athlete. She was losing interest in it and she was picking up photography and art. And she was kind of going through her own transformation right. And she's like, but I'm supposed to do this and I'm supposed to, play soccer and I'm supposed to. And she goes, all the kids, everybody's supposed to be something and social media. And we're all supposed to be something. And she starts to open up in a way, I swear to you, I would have never imagined in a million years that I'd have that kind of conversation with that kind of depth with my teenager.
Wow.
And opens up and she's crying. We have the most beautiful conversation. I remember just lying in bed, putting her to sleep. And I hadn't done that in years because she's a teenager. She doesn't want her parents putting her to sleep. It was the most magical night of my life. But I share that because it's like, even in that feeling of fear that we have a risk, like I can't share this. I can't be this. I can't put myself forward. I can't be who I am. I'm supposed to be someone different. Yeah. Like what happens when we live all in and we put the weapon down at the door?
Yeah.
We take off our body armor, literally, and we let people into our stories, our experiences that shape who we are. It's the vulnerability is what gives people trust. What gives people trust and gives them the power to open up back, and we foster connection.
Yes.
We foster something that's communal. Yeah. And like what a better gift for us to focus on that now during this pandemic when we're all like constricted and taking shelter. But we don't have to protect ourselves from these so-called risks.
Yeah, well, and also, right, it sounds like from what you're saying, we don't have to protect ourselves, and the idea that is, oh, well, if I protect myself, I'm going to be respected more, or I'm going to keep my job, or all of these things. And you're speaking to this deeper level. In some cases, right, once you open up, someone else is going to be the one to follow. And in other cases, maybe you would lose your job, but maybe you would find something that actually on a deeper level is what you're here to do, and to be able to, serve in the world and be actually happy in the world. So Yeah, I'm feeling the connection between taking risk, taking off your armor, being willing to go first and be vulnerable. And, we don't know always what's going to happen, but also if we're living that way, we're much more likely to be fulfilled in our lives, right? Rather than, like you said, be a shell or have a mask or be trying to prove something.
Right. And what did, something came up for me, but I'm curious when you said prove something, what do you mean by that?
I think that's one of the things that I often see when I'm coaching men is when there's something that a person feels like they have to prove, right? Like I'm strong enough, I'm powerful enough, I'm intelligent, or any of those things. Then we start to act from a place of trying to defend or trying to show or trying to, put on this facade like, oh, I'm great in this way. I don't want you to see that there might be a chink in my armor or that I might not have this skill because I'm afraid of who you're going to think what you're going to think of me.
Yeah.
And that really changes dynamics. And when I think about success and business and how ultimately it has to be based in, well, maybe this isn't true. I was going to say it has to be based in trust. You hit on trust earlier. I think the connections that last, right? The businesses that succeed, especially in this day and age, ultimately, there has to be an element of trust and working together. And, this is a deep topic, but for time's sake, as we're wrapping up, I think what I'm really curious about is what do you want to leave men with? What do you want to leave men with around this topic of being all in, of being a great person, having your handprint on the world, and not having to give up your effectiveness?
Yeah, well, an experience comes up for me that kind of just embodies the whole thing. May I? Mm-hmm. It goes back to, I guess, the thing you started this conversation with, which is, being good and doing good is not in opposition with, making some dough or, so-called success. Like these things can be integrated. They don't have to be at odds. And, I was working with this really cool company called Tableau, software company. And one of the things we would do in the workshops in the program of mine is, help everybody really dive deep into what connects them to this company they work for. So we're not just like figureheads, right? And so we spent a lot of time in the workshop helping people really tell a story of why they're so endeared to the company.
Yeah.
Like a lot, and it's hard work. It's not always at the surface. And there's this guy in the workshop pulls me aside as we're trying to exercise through it. He's like, Ben, can I talk to you? And I'm like, yeah. And he pulls me aside. He's like, I know why I do this, but it's not something I like to share with people. And I go, okay. And he tells me, he goes, one of the things we have to do to get a job here at Tableau is we have to, in our final interview, we have to demo the software. We have to show that we can use it to get the job, which is a kind of a cool little thing. He goes, I have a 10-year-old son. And as he says that, his eyes well up. And he kind of gets choked up. He goes, I have a 10-year-old son, and it's, he has a learning disability. He's dyslexic, and he starts talking about how hard it is for him. And now he has tears coming down his face, and he talks about how hard it is for him and his wife. And he goes, but the interesting thing for me is like I'm this engineer. I'm a math guy, so I'm wired in a way where my son is wired so differently. Like we're so disconnected. Mm-hmm. And my son can't even do his in class like his fourth grade math. Right. And I'm a math guy. So and now he's like fully crying, goes, but Ben, when I was getting the job at Tableau and I had to do the final interview, I had to demo the software. So I was prepping the night before, and he says, I took my son's fourth grade math homework. I could only imagine like a math problem. Right. Yeah. And he puts it into the software. And what Tableau does is they visualize things into life. It's visualization software. So the software literally took his son's math homework. So, 27 times 12, whatever. And
visual demonstration.
It did it. And it showed it in like circles and in heat graphs. And it put it in like this beautiful imagery of the math problem. And he goes, now he's fully crying. He goes, And my son was able to talk to me about math that night.
Wow.
And he was like, and he literally does this to me with his like, he raises up, his shoulders are back, his posture, he gets this like woof of like confidence, like self-assurance. He goes, and I'll never forget this. He goes, Ben, if Tableau can do that for my son, I need to make sure everybody on the planet has this software.
Wow.
And I'm like blown away. I'm like, Tracy, thanks for sharing that. I was like, do you ever share that with anybody? And guess what he says?
Nope.
It was one big fat no. And he went on to say, like, it's because, I don't want to go there. That's too personal. I don't even want to exploit it. He had all these reasons. Anyways, I didn't want to placate him and say, just go tell that to the world. But over time, just fast forward now, he started to share that and get some confidence, some self-assurance around it. And now it's as if he went from this guy that used to go around the world and be like, this is why you need to buy Tableau software. It makes people 10 times more efficient, to let me tell you why I care so much.
Right.
And he always goes in, he always feels.
Yeah.
And it was a lesson in like, and he became so wildly, he became like this different guy, almost like he grew wings. He increased his own perception of his own potential in the world. Mm-hmm. And now he's like on a mission. So I share that with you for two reasons. The change I see in the world is, what if we all saw ourselves on missions to go do something good, but not in a way that steamrolls? Because number one, he's like on a crusade now. He's all in. He is all in. And it's personal to him. And he sees himself in the context of his work. But here's the other part. It's like Antoinette Tuff. He's doing it differently. He's not yelling at people to put down their guns. He's sharing his story. Other people see themselves in it, and they participate with him. He's integrated with people, and he has an integrated life, and he is doing more, being more, living more. So the change I see in the world is if we can learn to relate to ourselves in a deeper way,
yes, to
the things we do for a living through our stories, and we share those with the world, we're going from like being on the sideline to being all in life. I feel like it's about being all in.
Yeah. And I would say, right, being all in really inspires and evokes others to do the same. So thank you for tying all that together and really, sharing, right, how it can affect a company and a company's ability to relate to other people and sales and all of that. And at the same time, right, this impact this man's life with his son and the closest people to him. So thank you so much for being here today and for sharing your stories and for supporting humanity in the workplace and all of us being all in, not only at work, but then getting to bring that home with us.
Well, you're welcome. And you're doing this. You're doing it by doing this podcast, and you're growing your community and your tribe and having people share. The best medicine right now is that people learn to collaborate and listen to each other and connect with one another. So thanks for what you're doing.
You're welcome.
I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and it gave you something to consider and explore in your life. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to ShanaJamesCoaching.com/quiz or text the word ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144 to get a sense of how you can become a better lover and leader. You'll start to see how you can be both more respected and desired in your unique and genuine way. If you don't feel as confident or as excited about life or love as you'd like to be, this quiz is a really great starting point and will guide you toward a more passionate love life and a more inspiring and successful career. So again, text ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144 or head over to ShanaJamesCoaching.com/quiz. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.